Well, we've got about a week till the 2015 NBA draft. So I am here with my fourth mock draft. I've got one more in me that will probably come next Tuesday. And that particular one I think will be a two-round edition. So if any of you wondered or wanted me to do a two-round, a full mock draft, that's probably when it's going to come. That's when you're going to get it. Now, in terms of this mock draft, as I've been going through the process, watching prospects and doing these mocks, something's kind of struck me a little bit is that last year's draft class was really hyped up and had a lot of ballyhoo. And frankly, I thought that draft class as a whole really underwhelmed and underperformed. The more I watch this draft class, the more I like it. And the more I think that this draft class is being slept on in terms of how good it could potentially be and just how much star power there is potentially, especially in the lottery. But there are good players to be had outside of the lottery. While this isn't the strongest international class and that hurts it a little bit, it opens up some opportunities for some American-born players to go a little bit higher than they would in some other drafts, and that's not necessarily a bad thing either. But as I've been piecing together this draft, more and more I like this draft, and I see guys all over it, all the positions that could eventually develop into big-time players at the NBA level. I truly believe it. You can check out my one-round mock in the description box down below. Now, some of the things that I'll talk about, I'll go ahead and start off with this. You'll notice that this time there's a change again with the #1 overall pick, and that I'm back to having Karl-Anthony Towns go #1 to Minnesota. Personally, between him and Okafor, I think he's the better fit for Minnesota. Although Okafor would make sense for Minnesota if they were going to move their big man that they already have under a big-time contract. But that's a big if. In this case, Karl-Anthony Towns to me provides more versatility because he could play at the 4. He could also play at the 5, where I think Okafor is solely restricted to being a 5. I think Karl-Anthony Towns has more defensive upside, more all-around potential, even though, again, I do think Okafor is going to be a pretty good center and potentially an all-star caliber center at the NBA level. But right now, I think Karl-Anthony Towns is the guy from Minnesota at #1, even though I'm not even sure at this point that I'm convinced that that should be the case. And I'll get to that in a moment. In terms of the Lakers at #2, as I've talked about before, I'm not necessarily sold on Jahlil Okafor for them. I really don't think that's the best option or the best choice for them. But that's probably the direction that they're going to go. I can make a very strong argument in my mind, at least, for D'Angelo Russell. I can make an equally strong argument for a guy like a Justise Winslow and for somebody else as well. And again, more on that in a moment. But I think ultimately the Lakers are going to sit there and say, we've had so much success as an organization throughout the years with the dominant big man. It's something that's lacking in the NBA today, especially in the offensive end. You've got an Okafor that's a legit low-post scorer. At the 5 position, a legit 5, again, something that there's not a lot of in the league. You're looking at potentially having to contend with teams like Houston with Dwight Howard and Memphis with Marc Gasol. You're sitting there and saying to yourself, you could see why the Lakers would want to go down that route. But to me, the wild card in all of this draft is going to be Kristaps Porzingis from Sevilla. The Latvian kid that's 7'1", about 225 pounds. You'll notice again for the second straight mock, I've got him going #3 overall to the Philadelphia 76ers. I personally, this is just my opinion, I'm basing it solely off of my opinion. I believe there are many teams, including teams picking in the lottery, that think Porzingis may very well be the best player in this draft and be the one most worthy of the #1 overall pick, even though a lot of them would lack the courage to be able to take a guy like him. The reason I say that is because you look at some of the notable foreign busts over the years, like the Bargnanis to a degree, definitely the Skilishvilis and the Milicics. It's one thing to miss on an American-born player and an American player from a college. It's a whole other thing to miss on an international player that most fans don't have any idea about before they get to the NBA level. So a team like Minnesota or the Lakers might sit there and view Kristaps Porzingis as the best player in this draft or the most intriguing player with the most potential upside that could do the most things for their organization short-term or especially long-term. But it might be safer for them to take a Towns or an Okafor, because if they miss on one of those guys, not a lot of fans are going to blame them, because they're going to be like, well, I probably would have done the same thing. But I look at Philadelphia. The 76ers are in a position where they can roll the dice and they can gamble, because we're still not convinced that their general manager, frankly, knows what the fuck he's doing. And while a lot of people will sit there and say they've already got Nerlens Noel, they've got Joel Embiid, why in the hell would they want a Porzingis, especially when you still have a Dario Saric overseas, another guy for the front court? Why would you bring in another front court player? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, the Sixers are terrible. They lack in NBA talent big time. So at this point in time, you're in a position where you're them, you're just drafting best player available, even though it's not always the way to go in the NBA draft. In this particular case, it is for them because they're so boo-boo terrible bad. Number two, when you look at this league, it's very much a perimeter-based league, which a lot of you would indicate to me, then why don't you take a point guard? Why don't you take a D'Angelo Russell, the way he can space the floor with his shooting? I have concerns about D'Angelo Russell and whether or not he's really a point guard or a two guard at the NBA level. And if he's a two guard, he's still a really good player, a potential all-star caliber player, but he doesn't have the same value based off of what he does as opposed to if he's a point guard. And I think Porzingis has more overall value for them as that stretch type of athletic four. Here's a guy that his upside is through the roof. And you're talking about in a situation where, yes, the 76ers have Saric, but he's overseas, and he might still be overseas for another season or two. Furthermore, you've got a Nerlens Noel who can play the five as a defensive stopper, which complements what Porzingis could do at the four very well. But you could also sit there if an Embiid ever comes back healthy and he develops into a starting big man at the NBA level, you could bring in Nerlens Noel off of the bench as that high-powered kind of six-man in the front court. And you also have the versatility with Porzingis at times to be able to play him at the three and play that kind of gargantuan triple threat towers type of lineup. To me, I think Porzingis has to be the pick for the 76ers at this point in time. I really do. And in my next mock, next week, I don't know what I'll do with a lot of these picks, but I can pretty much guarantee you Porzingis will be that guy at number 3. And there's a part of me that thinks that maybe the Timberwolves should gamble and take him number 1. But that's just me. In terms of other picks, the Knicks would have to be doing backflips in this particular instance and circumstance, because they would get the guy that I think they've had their hearts set on for a long time, in D'Angelo Russell from Ohio State. I think he'd be a perfect fit for what they do, and he would be a marquee player for a marquee market that needs to be a marquee factor again in the NBA. In terms of Orlando, I've got him take a Justise Winslow from Duke, looking at him potentially playing on the perimeter with Victor Oladipo, makes them one of the best perimeter defensive teams in the NBA, which is important when you're talking about playing in a conference where you have to face LeBron and Kyrie Irving multiple times a year, when you're talking about having to guard, John Wall and Bradley Beal several times a year, when you're talking about potentially having to guard Derrick Rose and Jimmy Butler several times a year, especially when you factor in that Tobias Harris is a free agent, and who knows if Orlando's going to want to pay him the type of money he's probably going to be looking for. Winslow would be a younger, cheaper, and frankly better option. He makes a lot of sense for them there, as does Mudiay to Sacramento at number 6. They just need talent, period, and a guy like Mudiay could be a point guard, could be a combo type of guard as well, but he makes a lot of sense for them. You'll notice I've got Boston trading up for Willie Cauley-Stein at number 8. I'm not convinced Cauley-Stein makes it to number 8, but I am convinced for some reason that I think Boston would really love to have Willie Cauley-Stein, and if they were going to move up into the top 10 of the lottery, which I think they're poised to do and have a desire to do, to me that would be the guy that they would have to be targeting, at least in my opinion. Now, one thing to note about the tail portion of this draft, I think especially once you start getting to Cleveland at number 24 and Memphis at 25 throughout the rest of that first round, I think you're going to see several situations where teams will be moving up into that spot, or you'll see several of these teams like Cleveland and Memphis will either try to trade their picks out just for cash considerations, for salary cap reasons, or they'll be looking at draft and stash type of guys. So from an international standpoint, you've heard about Mudiay, even though he's an American player, Porzingis. You've heard about Hezonja from Croatia, playing for Barcelona now. And that's pretty much all you hear about for the international players. But I think you're going to hear a lot more about Hernan Gomez and Justise, and there will be some others. The big dude from, I think it's Senegal. The name escapes me at the moment. I think it's Jahlil. You're going to see potentially several guys in that range between maybe I'd even go so far as between pick 20 and pick 30, you're probably going to see 4 to 6 international players going there, even if their talents don't necessitate going there, because of what could go along with drafting those international players in terms of that draft and stash capabilities and the amount of guaranteed money that you're not tying up into that guy that might not contribute for you right away. Amount of money that you could take and reinvest into your roster in other areas, which is going to definitely be a potential philosophy for a team like, let's say, San Antonio, for Memphis, for Cleveland. That's a very big possibility. So, ultimately it remains to be seen what will happen. We've got about a week till the NBA draft. And like I said, next week, I'll give you my final 2-round 2015 NBA mock draft. But feel free, again, to check out my 1-round mock in the description box below. And let me know your thoughts on it. Let me know how much of a genius I am. Sixers fans, let me know how pissed off you are about me continuing to mock Porzingis to your guys, even though when it happens next week, I could sit there and say I told you so and say I was one of the first that had Porzingis going 3 to Philadelphia, so suck it. Interesting. All right, see you later.